Did you know that the greatest empires in human history didn't just fall, they practically jumped off the cliff? We like to think of massive civilizations being brought down by epic, unstoppable forces of nature. But the truth is much more embarrassing. More often than not, the world's most powerful rulers built incredible, continent-spanning dynasties, only to watch them completely shatter because of one spectacularly bad decision. We are talking about total historical facepalms. Today, we are looking at how absolute power breeds absolute blindness, and how a single bad call can erase centuries of progress overnight. Let's start with a city that honestly sounded like something straight out of a fantasy movie. Imagine a massive metropolis of 200,000 people built right in the middle of a lake. This was Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire. It was connected by massive causeways, fed by literal floating gardens, and centered around giant pyramids that dominated the skyline. Back in the early 1500s, this place was bigger, cleaner, and more advanced than London, Paris, or pretty much any city in Europe. The Aztecs were an absolute powerhouse, ruling over 5 million people and commanding a military that had basically never lost a major battle. Their rulers believed they had a literal debt to the gods, a debt they paid with the lives of their captured enemies. But here is where the fatal flaw comes in. When you build an entire empire on a foundation of fear and intimidation, you end up creating enemies in every single corner. The surrounding tribes that the Aztecs conquered never forgot the brutality. One tribe in particular, the Tlaxcalans, had spent a century watching their own children being taken away. They were just waiting, desperate for any chance to get revenge and strike back. That exact chance walked right into their lives in 1519. According to Aztec tradition, this was the exact year a legendary feathered serpent god was supposed to return. From the east, and right on cue, a Spanish explorer named Hernán Cortés showed up from the east. Now, Cortés didn't have a massive army. He arrived with just about 500 Spanish soldiers, a few horses, and a handful of cannons. The Aztec Emperor Moctezuma made the first massive miscalculation. Hoping to appease what he genuinely thought might be a visiting deity, he sent Cortés incredible gifts made of pure gold. That was a huge mistake. Instead of making the Spanish go away, the gold just made them incredibly greedy. As Cortés started marching toward the capital, all those angry, conquered tribes saw their moment. They didn't join the Spanish as captives. They joined them willingly as enthusiastic allies who wanted payback. By the time Cortés reached the gates of Tenochtitlan, he wasn't just leading a few hundred Europeans anymore. He had tens of thousands of furious native warriors marching right beside him. Moctezuma tried to be hospitable and welcomed Cortés into the heart of the city. Within just a few weeks, the emperor found himself a literal prisoner inside his own palace. Eventually, the Aztec people realized what was happening and rose up against the invaders, kicking the Spanish out of the city during a night of absolute chaos and heavy losses. But even though the Spanish retreated, they left behind a silent, invisible weapon: smallpox. The disease tore through the population like wildfire because the local people had absolutely zero natural immunity to it. Within a matter of months, half the population of the capital was dead, including the new emperor. Elite warriors who had never lost a fair fight in their lives were suddenly dying from something they couldn't even see. Cortés returned 10 months later with a massive strategy. He cut off the city's fresh water supply, blocked the causeways, and starved the capital for 80 days. By August of 1521, the last Aztec emperor was captured while trying to escape in a canoe, and a city that once ruled an entire world was left in absolute ruins. They thought they had to sacrifice lives to keep their world alive. But a toxic mix of a misunderstood prophecy, a devastating disease, and a century of accumulated hatred brought them down all at once. Then we have the Persian Empire, which started with a massive rebellion in 550 BC, when a young prince named Cyrus overthrew his own grandfather. Cyrus was a military genius. Within 20 years, he conquered legendary wealth, took over Babylon without even needing to fight, and established the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. But Cyrus did something different. He didn't rule through sheer terror. He actually freed people from captivity, let conquered societies keep their own local customs, and respected their religions. People loved him so much, they called him Father. His successors expanded that legacy even further. Darius I stretched the empire all the way from Egypt to India. He built a legendary royal road spanning thousands of kilometers and set up a postal system so incredibly fast that messages could travel across Asia in just a few days. He built magnificent ceremonial cities where representatives from dozens of nations came to pay their respects to the King of Kings. But then, Darius made the one stupid mistake that changed everything. He decided he wanted to conquer Greece, and he ended up losing badly at the Battle of Marathon. His son Xerxes took that loss personally and swore absolute revenge. He put together what was probably the largest army the ancient world had ever seen and marched straight toward Europe. Xerxes was so arrogant that when a sudden storm destroyed a floating bridge he built, he literally ordered his soldiers to whip the sea 300 times and throw metal chains into the water to punish the ocean. He built a new bridge by tying hundreds of ships together, and his army crossed over. When he reached a narrow pass, a tiny force of Greeks blocked his path. Xerxes sent a message demanding they surrender their weapons, but the Greek leader simply replied with 2 words: "Come, take them." The Greeks held the line for 3 days until a traitor showed the Persians a secret mountain path. Xerxes managed to advance and even burned Athens to the ground, but his victory was incredibly short-lived. The Greek navy completely smashed his fleet, and the Greek army crushed his remaining forces. Xerxes was forced to flee back home, and the grand dream of swallowing Greece died with him. The empire survived for another 150 years, but it was never the same, eventually falling to a young general who learned everything from studying Persia's own playbook. Moving on to the next major superpower, let's look at the rise and fall of the Japanese Empire. In 1868, a teenage emperor named Meiji took over a nation that was completely locked in the past, ruled by traditional samurai and local warlords. But within just 50 years, Japan pulled off one of the fastest modernizations in human history. They became the very first Asian power in the modern era to defeat a major European nation when they completely crushed the Russian fleet in 1905. By 1942, the empire was absolutely massive. The rising sun flag flew over Korea, Manchuria, Southeast Asia, and a huge chunk of the Pacific Ocean. An island nation, smaller than the state of California, was suddenly controlling an empire of over 100 million people. But Japan's leadership made a fatal, arrogant miscalculation. On December 7, 1941, they launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. They were gambling on the idea that America would rather negotiate a quick peace deal than fight a brutal, drawn-out war. The brilliant admiral who actually planned the attack had studied in America and tried to warn his bosses that they were just waking up a sleeping giant, but the generals completely ignored him. By 1945, that mistake caught up with them, and the empire was slowly suffocating. Allied submarines had completely cut off Japan's merchant ships, leaving the country with almost no oil, rubber, or food. The legendary navy that had dominated the Pacific was sitting at the bottom of the ocean. Heavy bombers turned Tokyo into an absolute nightmare, killing 100,000 people in a single night of firebombing. Yet even as the country crumbled, the military leaders refused to back down, demanding the nation fight to the bitter end. Young pilots volunteered for suicide missions, crashing their planes directly into enemy warships. The military high command called it the decisive battle, and even started training regular civilians to fight off an invasion with nothing but sharpened bamboo spears. Then came August 6th. A single atomic bomb completely erased the city of Hiroshima. 80,000 people vanished in a flash of light that was literally brighter than the sun. The city just ceased to exist. 3 days later, a second bomb leveled Nagasaki, killing 40,000 more instantly. Right between those two massive explosions, the Soviet Union declared war and swept through Manchuria, completely wiping out Japan's last remaining army and destroying any tiny hope they had left for a negotiated surrender. The collapse of these superpowers ultimately came down to fatal arrogance and massive blind spots. Japan gambled its entire future on a single surprise attack, naively believing a global powerhouse would just back down. Instead, they found themselves completely outmatched, facing atomic destruction, and forced into a total surrender that permanently rewrote their society. Meanwhile, the Russian monarchy sealed its own doom by ignoring its starving, desperate citizens, while dragging an unready nation into a devastating world war. In both cases, these rulers proved that no dynasty is too massive to fall when absolute delusion replaces reality.